another exciting episode of What Else You Got, a podcast with Mitch and Margo. Hey, Mitch, what else you got for today?
Here's a fun one for you. Being smart and intelligent, does it require a college degree?
Hmm, Well, this is going to be a short podcast then because the answer's no. What else you got?
So, why do you say you don't need a degree to be considered smart or intelligent?
There's other ways to obtain intelligence. The thing and common sense. I mean, common sense is pretty hard to learn in a class in school. But that being said, as someone who hires employees, sometimes a college degree is helpful. Why? Because people who have taken the time and put out the effort to go to college, whether you've achieved the degree or not, there's something to be said for going to college classes. First of all, it's a different environment, typically, than your high school experience, and it's a different level of interaction and intelligence gathering. Because if you're sitting in a college classroom of 300, 500 people, the professor's not going to pause and wait for you to finish taking your notes. You're going to have to figure out how to keep up, how to glean the information you need that the professor is spewing in his lecture, and you're going to have to figure out how to get the information, prepare for the test, and move on. There's something to be said for the college experience. But with that being said, you don't have to have a college education to be intelligent, smart, and capable. There is an innate ability in a lot of people to be smart and to self-educate and to self-motivate. But if you don't have the ability to self-motivate, then a college education and experience might be helpful for you to learn strategies and techniques to succeed in the workplace and in life.
Yeah, I think probably my approach to the difference in intelligence, smart, and a college degree is really how you apply yourself, because it really comes down to if you don't really apply yourself, you have the knowledge, but you don't do anything with it, you come across as if you don't have the knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, but you figure out how to get the knowledge, that's where true intelligence really comes in, is trying to figure out what you don't have and how to get it, and getting the resources, getting the application, and just trying to figure it out. Because there's a couple people I know that they went to college, they dropped out, and the best they've really achieved is gas station attendant. And it's one of those that they're they have the intelligence, they just don't have the application. Therefore, it's one of those that I'm going, I wish that they were more successful, but because they don't have that drive, it's one of those that they have intelligence buried, they just don't have it applied, which makes them appear less intelligent.
Well, and on the flip side of that, I know plenty of college degree earners who, once they've earned their degree, they stop learning. They figure, okay, I've got the degree. I don't need to keep learning. I don't want to keep learning. And so they become stunted either in their career or in their life or both. And so there's something to be said for that person who has the self motivation to continue to gain knowledge. It's also interesting if you think about it, certain careers require continuing education, where other careers don't require you to continue learning in your specific field. I don't know if that just has something to do with ethics, depending upon the field, or if it applies mostly to like healthcare fields, but there are certain licensures in career fields that require a level of continuing education in order to maintain your position in the field. Not all careers require continuing education. So again, it comes back to self-motivation. Is a person motivated to continue expanding their knowledge, increasing their intelligence, exercising their brain?
just because you talked about continuing education in healthcare, I know in IT there's some parts that require it, but it really comes down to the certifications. Some certifications to keep them current, you need to be receiving continual education, but it also really comes down to what is the definition of continuing education. There's some definitions of you continue to go to college classes. There's others that you sit through company provided trainings. There's others that you just happen to watch YouTube in accounts, which in some cases that is the case. But it really comes down to what is the definition of continued education. Even though personally for me, I have some certifications that have lapsed because I don't bother submitting the continual education because it's paperwork and I don't like the paperwork for it. But the certification says I have been qualified for it, but my job type technically requires me to continually learn about new developments, new changes, new technologies. Because when ChatGPT came out, I had to sit down, take some time to figure out what it's trying to do, how it's done, and what implications it has for my job. And it's one of those that I had to take time to learn about it, not so much learning how to use it, but it's the how to, since I work security, it's how to protect others from improper use of it, which is completely different. And it's one of those that I have to continually learn new things or new ways of doing things just because technology keeps changing. So what I learned 10 years ago has absolutely nothing to do with today.
Well, and that's valid in other industries also. You had mentioned who defines what continuing education is. Well, if you're in a field that has a professional license, it's the governmental department over that professional license that defines what qualifies as continuing education. So, for example, in the mental health industry, I'm in Idaho, you're in Texas. In Idaho, the continuing education credits have to be approved by the Department of Professional Licenses in order for it to count as continuing education credits. And so it is, for this field, it's a government entity that defines what is acceptable as continuing education. So if you are a licensed professional, it is probably defined by your state's governing authority over that license. And if you want to renew your license, you have to prove that you have the the continuing education. Usually certificates are provided to prove that you've taken the course.
Yeah, and just because IT is a little different, so what I've learned is certain bodies of industry, it is very much the government or the presiding authority over it. And in IT, the presiding authority are technically corporations and organizations and nonprofits that they have established a rapport for being authoritative in the sense of they know what's going on. They have established regulations around it, and people have acknowledged their authority over it. And because in IT, I don't know how many certificates authorities there are for the various fields, but it's one of those that you're allowed to get a certificate from one authority on a certain topic, but you can't get that same certificate from a different authority because they don't qualify in that area. So it really comes down to the various different ways of receiving a certificate.
Well, and that comes to the topic also of who should be the governing authority. Should we self-govern? Should we rely on the government to monitor and govern, thus the word government? Should we rely on them to set the standards? Should we rely on industry experts to set the standards? There are a lot of opinions about who the governing authority should be. In a perfect world, we would self govern. In a perfect world, we would make choices that are not only good for ourselves, but good for our fellow human beings. But the whole reason government is around is because there are a lot of people who don't make choices that are in the best interest of their fellow human beings. That's why there are licensing boards for certain career fields. That's why they are monitored and governed, because not everybody in a certain field is going to make the most ethical choices that impact other people. And so, yeah, who is the best person to manage these? Is it an industry expert? Is it the individual, or is it the government?
So I want to bring up something maybe a little controversial, and one of the things that you mentioned is the reason why we need these authorities is because there's some people who are a little less ethical on the approach. Going back to the original topic of how do you determine if someone's smart, intelligence is a college degree, some of the smartest and most creative people I have ever met are criminals.
Psychopath, yeah, or sociopath.
I wasn't even talking about psychopaths. I'm talking if we're talking drug trade, the way they try to circumvent the authority to uh, basically law enforcement to prevent them from distributing. Some of their approaches are phenomenally brilliant, but it's also just one of those that there's a reason why cat and mouse is a thing. Both sides are intelligent. Both sides have different resources, but it really comes down to how do you apply what you have, and that's really the way that you can determine an intelligence is based off of how you take what you have, how you can apply it, and how you can leverage it to gain better benefits.
I love the cat and mouse analogy because think about it. Who is more intelligent, the cat or the mouse? And what are their motivations and what drives their decision making? Yeah, I mean, this can be applied to life and the definition of intelligence. What is the motivation? What drives the decision making between behind our pursuit of intelligence and our application of any intelligence we may have?
Yeah, there's a cartoon which I'll post it or put it on the screen so people can see it, but it's a depiction of a tree and a test provider that says today's test is you have to climb the tree. And the participants is a monkey, an elephant, a fish, a cat, a dog, and a couple other animals. And that with the caption of this is today's intelligence test, the fish is not going to be able to climb that tree. But is the fish stupid? No. Is the fish dumb? No. It just it can swim better than the monkey can.
Yep. Yep. And that is something that's a image that I saw a lot when my kids were in school because the fact of the matter is we all learn differently, but this is something that can be applied also to the workplace. If you take into consideration, especially if you're a manager of people, if you take into consideration that we're all different. We all learn differently. We all have different skills. The trick to building a good team in the workplace is knowing, okay, if Mitch is a fish and Margo is a monkey, then it's not that one is better than the other. It just means that as a manager, you need to put the appropriate people with the appropriate projects so that they can excel and achieve end goals because you're using their innate skills and their innate intelligence and properly applying it to the right project. If your team is failing, it might not be because the players are lousy. It could be because the coach or the manager is putting the players in the wrong positions based on their skills.
Now, one of the interesting things that I list as one of the key things for intelligence and being smart is the willingness to at least try. And so it's one of those that, yes, you might be put on something that you have no clue, no skill on, or you just don't like, but who knows? If you spend enough effort, you may find that that is actually your strength, but also understanding that at a certain point, there is a cost balance that if you just cannot achieve the quality, kind of like what we were talking with the last podcast of knowing the different requirement tiers, if you cannot hit the minimums, but you keep trying and you keep failing, you either need to change your approach or you need to seek help or change the way it is. Because there is a definition that I always get a kick out of the definition of insanity, trying the exact same thing, hoping for a different result.
I was just waiting for a chance to interrupt you because I was going to say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result.
That probably explains why programmers are insane because we click a button, it works 1 second, you click the button again, it doesn't work, and we go insane over it. But
That
yeah,
makes sense.
but it really just comes down to willing to try and willing to acknowledge weakness and willingness to um, find different solutions. Because who knows, the way you've been instructed to do something may be correct, but it may not be working for you. But you may find something that is better that works for everyone, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about. I think it was the last podcast with um, how a smoke detector was made. It's learning through failure to achieve something undesired, which is better.
Well, and you made a good point there too. Also, if talking about getting your team to a desired end goal. You know, we talked about the fish swimming and the monkey climbing. Well, if your goal is to get one person to the finish line, then you can tailor it for their specific skills. But if your goal is to get the entire team to the finish line, then you may need to redefine the parameters of the goal that you're looking at. And you know, another great quote is, if you want to get somewhere quick, go by yourself. If you want to go somewhere far, go with a team. I'm sure I butchered that bit. Have you heard that one before?
I actually have not heard that one, but it makes complete sense. Uh, so one of the games that I've played, RimWorld, it's a base building game that you establish a colony and you work with all of your different people. And as you gave that quote, I was thinking, yeah, if you want to go run, grab something on the larger map, you send one person. But if you're trying to traverse the world map, you're probably going to build up a colony, build up lots of resources, and travel as a larger group. And it's because you have the resources and you can distribute the load across more. Because if you have to carry everything yourself, it gets very heavy or very cumbersome very quickly. But if you're able to share the load, then you the group can have everything that's needed, while one individual person may not have
Yep,
everything needed.
exactly. So if you want to get somewhere quick, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a team.
That really is a great quote. So I want to shift things a little bit.
Mm,
So what would you consider the definition of being dumb is?
mm. This one feels like we might be trudging through some mud. Definition
Well,
of dumb.
yeah,
Well,
I don't.
is definition of dumb the same definition of insanity? I don't know. Dumb. Hmm.
It could be very close, but one reason why I want to highlight the definition of dumb is if you don't have the contrast between intelligence and uh, dumb or stupid, you don't know what some of the subtleties are, because the difference between the two are very finite. Because there's a quote that says the difference between inspiration and insanity is a very thin line.
According to Google, the definition of dumb is temporarily unable or unwilling to speak. I'm sure that's not what you were going for, but I really like the first part of it, of temporarily unable or unwilling. I would like to just put a period there, because in my mind, I would like that as the definition of dumb, someone who's temporarily unable or unwilling, period,
Hmm.
to do anything, you know? So if you're unwilling to seek additional education, if you're unwilling to strive for more, if you're unwilling to adapt, then I think that is the definition of dumb. You're limiting yourself. And those are
Yeah, and as you said that, I thought of one in particular person you probably know her quite well, that throughout time she has refused to acknowledge slash learn technology. Somehow she watches TV, somehow she's got a smartphone to do simple stuff on, but she's gotten to the point where technology is the only way for her to do things, and because she never took the time to actually learn how to do it, it is a severe impediment now.
okay, but to that point, if we're talking about generations, you can't. I I push back on the concept of labeling somebody as dumb because they're from a different generation than you are. So someone who has lived longer than you is not dumb because they don't understand something that has come along early in your life that was easy for you to adapt to and acclimate to and understand. So so yes, I hear what you're saying, but just because somebody's from a different generation doesn't mean they're dumb.
And granted, I wasn't going for that. I was going more off the unwilling. But yes,
I know, but that's what stood out to me.
so it's definitely one of those that it comes down to yes, there is sometimes generational difference, and there's some people that they are phenomenally brilliant from their time, and we can definitely learn a lot from that. Which also just goes back to, do you have the willingness to learn?
Well, it also comes back to the concept of who's defining the scope. So not just defining the scope of a project or defining the scope of whether something's good enough or perfect enough, but defining the word dumb, defining the word smart. Yes, we can look it up in a dictionary. Yes, we can ask Google what a specific word means, but it comes down to what, how do I define it? How do you define it? And does it lead to prejudice? Does it lead to prejudging someone before we understand that they're actually a fish instead of a monkey?
Yeah, and that's definitely a great uh, thing to point out. The definition I had picked out is not only contradict what you know is right, you don't learn from mistakes,
Mm,
you're willing to be led blindly by
good.
others, meaning you don't ask questions, and you accept only what is offered. And so it really is just one of those that you only look at things as they currently are, not as they may actually be, not as they could be. You only see what is right in front of you, and you take what is convenient, despite whether or not it's beneficial to you or detrimental.
I think we could take each of those individual definitions that you just listed and talk for quite a while about each of those. One of them that you mentioned was just blindly following. So how easy is that in today's world? How many people do you know that blindly follow? How many, and okay, that comes back to the concept of a college education too, because it was in a specific college class. I was sitting in business ethics, and a concept was introduced in an interesting way. I mean, the syllabus had been put out at the beginning of the semester, and the professor stood up there and he was teaching against the topics that were in the textbook that we were supposed to be learning from. And I was sitting there. I had read the chapter because remember, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I had already done the work. And I was sitting there thinking, wait a second, he's speaking the opposite of what is covered in the chapter, business ethics class. And took the time and I looked around at the other people in the classroom. It was not a giant classroom. There was probably 45 people in the class. And everybody was just sitting there nodding and listening. And I was so confused. I was like, did I read the wrong chapter? Did I have the wrong textbook? And so it was hard for me. I don't remember how many minutes it took, but I finally raised my hand and I said, this isn't what's in the textbook. You're speaking the opposite of what's in the textbook. And he stopped and he said, and that's how long it took for one of you to speak up against what I was saying. If you had read the work, you would have known that what I was saying was opposite and wrong. And if you didn't speak up and say something against it, then you're going to fail at ethics. And so that was a concept that I learned because I took a college class. Do you just blindly follow someone because they're in a position of authority? Do you just blindly believe and accept what they're saying because they're saying it? Because somehow you've decided the easiest path is to just be agreeable? Or are you going to speak up? Are you going to do your own research? Are you going to figure out things for yourself? So I think that could be an accurate definition of dumb is if you're just blindly following somebody else. Seek knowledge for yourself.
Yeah, and very interesting topic because yesterday I was, because I still have a day job. Yesterday, there was a department all hands, and it was one of those that it was. the CEO was talking to basically a group of engineers, and he basically said, if someone says I said it, do it because I said it, refute it because I may be incorrect. And don't just do it because someone said I said to do it or I said to do it. Challenge me. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why it's not the correct option. Because you, who specialize in this field, know better than I do. So be willing to challenge anything that is in theory from me because it may be incorrect. And then an engineer spoke up and goes, so earlier this week there's this production issue, and it was treated as a high priority because you reported it, and I thought it was a low priority. And the CEO goes, yeah, if it's exactly as you described it, yeah, it should have been a low priority. It shouldn't have been a high priority because I said it. It doesn't matter if I said it or if a customer said it. It should be treated as the problem it is, not because of who said it.
Well, and that brings up another valid point too of don't so you said refute it. I love that idea, but don't just refute it. Don't just be a complainer or someone who pushes back. Be someone who offers a solution. So if you're going to refute something, if you're going to push back, come with a solution also, because there's just not a lot of value in complaining. There is value in constructive criticism that comes with a proposed solution, suggestion, change.
I'm actually going to refute that slightly. I'm going to use the word that sometimes the solution is pointing out the problems. It doesn't have to be complaining about the problem. It just says, "Hey, we have this problem. It doesn't move quite correctly. I don't have the solution because I don't know the solution, but as a group, we can figure out the solution." Sometimes the solution is pointing out that there is a problem and then letting the group figure it out.
Oh, but so the solution is not pointing out the problem. The beginning of the conversation can be pointing out the problem. And the I think it's valid to say, hey, I don't have a solution, but I do see this as a problem. Can we work together to come up with a solution? I think that's reasonable. I don't think you have to have the solution in mind in order to point out that there is a problem, but I think you need to acknowledge that also. But I also think it's worthwhile to take a minute before you complain, before you refute, and ask yourself, is there a solution to this? Can I offer some suggestions? Because by offering some suggestions, you can then at least start the discussion, start the brainstorm, and step down the path toward a solution.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to don't be part of the problem.
Yeah,
Try to get to being part of the solution.
yeah,
And yes, you don't have to have the solution, but you should be a part of the solution, not part of the problem.
right. Don't be dumb. Be smart. Look for solutions. It's all about using your common sense and self-educating, self-motivating. That's right. There you
And
go.
one final thought on it really comes down to one of the key differences is the willingness to be wrong
Ah,
and the willingness to learn
yes.
from being wrong.
Yes, being humble enough to accept that you do not know everything, but you have the ability to find solutions, either yourself or with a team.
Well, what else you got?
That's it for today, Mitch. Hey, maybe people could suggest some comments down in the comment box to help us come up with solutions for better podcasts.
Well, that's it for this one. Thanks everyone for tuning in for another episode of What Else You Got with Mitch and Margo. And as Margo said, like, subscribe, comment, all the fun stuff on all the different platforms. And feel free to provide feedback. And until next time, this is What Else You Got.